Our next step is to create source strings. Source strings are typically 2D strings that define where a cross-section is to be cut from the tin and exported to HEC-RAS or the other river packages. If you happen to have cross-sections surveyed, then your surveyed cross-section strings could be used as your source strings. The most important part about creating a source string is that they be created in the correct location and that the string be perpendicular to the direction of flow. So first of all, we're going to look for significant changes of grade along the thalweg of the river. To do this, we'll want to use a section view. So we'll create a new view and go to View New Section. And then we'd like to profile the center line of the river. River strings, center line. Now keep in mind we're working in the upstream direction, and what we're looking for is significant changes of grade. Now to find these in plan as well, I'm going to minimize our perspective view and then do a window, tile horizontal. Then I'm going to zoom out a little bit in our plan view so that I can see where we are along the river. Now it's getting quite a bit cluttered with the survey data, so I'm going to come to the minus button and turn off that survey as well. Now you'll notice that as we move our cursor across the section view, I can see a crosshair moving in plan, showing me exactly where we are. Now the first thing that I found is that this is definitely a significant change of grade. I'm going to want to make sure I've got a cross section here. Definitely going to want a cross section here, and then after this it's much smoother in long section, so I'd probably have definitely a section at the end, definitely one here, and look at picking up this little area in here. So now that we've identified the location that we want to have our source strings or cross sections taken, we'll now look at how to create them. The first source string that we're going to create will be only a 2-point string. So first of all, we have to put it into the correct model. It'll be a new model for our source strings, and we'll call it source strings. We don't care about a name. We can erase that. We'll make sure our source strings get names later. We'll give it a new color, just to give it a bit of contrast to our center lines. We'll make them magenta. Now because this one only is going to have 2 points on it, I'm going to use my CAD strings Create Line option. Now where I'd like to start creating this line, I could zoom in to find out exactly where that is, but I'm allowed to start creating a line by snapping on a point in my section view. And it's asking me for a height. Now the reason it's asking me for a height at this moment is because my height snap is turned on. Now if I'll turn that height snap off because I don't need the heights, select enter anyway, and you see now it's snapped on to that location in plan view. So what I've done is made sure that I've got this high point in my plan. Now I'm going to zoom out a little bit, and I'm going to want to add on my tin so that I can see exactly where I'm moving across my sections. Now with any of our design software packages, you don't want to define your cross sections higher than you expect your maximum flood levels. Otherwise it reduces the accuracy of the design packages. For these areas, we don't expect the water levels to ever go above an elevation 165. Now I'd like to monitor the level that my cursor is at. In order to do that, I'm going to go up to Tins, Inquire, Height, and get the height from my Survey and Buildings. I'm going to take this panel, park it off in the corner, and now I'm able to see where I'm drawing these lines. So there's my 160, there's my 164, I'm up to 165 here. Now when you're drawing these, you also want to make sure that you're going perpendicular to the direction of flow, which is often perpendicular to the direction of flow, which is often perpendicular to your contours. So this would be a good spot for my second point. Now, that's my string created. Unfortunately, it's going to be in the background. I'm going to have to move it into the foreground. So I'm going to select my model button, my menu button, come down, go models to front, and I'm going to bring my source strings to the front. Now I can see that line. The next thing I'd want to do now is to extend this in the other direction. So I'm going to append onto the end of that string. I'm going to come back to my strings commands, drag that out to the right, and going to use, grab our points commands, drag that out to the right, and we're going to use the append command. You'll find the append command out here at the end of the line, append point, pick the end of that string, and now I'm ready to do the other half. Now when I'm coming out this side, once again I'd like to keep it perpendicular to my flow, or my expected directional flow, and come up to about an elevation of 165 again, which would take me to approximately here. So pick and accept. So I've just escaped to finish that. I've just created my first source string, and you'll notice how it was not a straight line. Often cross sections are not straight lines. Keep in mind the idea is that they should be perpendicular to the directional flow. Now let's repeat this for our next section, and the idea here is to pick up the bottom of this low spot of the river. So to repeat that once again, what I would do is come back, create that string, pick the low point that I want to start at in section, come back into plan. Looking up here, I'm trying to go perpendicular to my flow, pick and accept that. Then I'm looking at extending on to the other side, so I'm going to go up to my point commands, drag that across to append, add an extra point onto the end of my section string, source string, bringing that out once again, trying to go perpendicular to my flow up to an elevation of approximately 165. Click and accept. Now we will repeat this for another section up near the top of the river. We'll create it once again for the section here. If we'll zoom out a little bit, you can see what that is. We'll make sure we pick up a section about here, and then we'll also make sure we pick up the low point and this high point as well. Now that we've finished creating source strings at significant changes in grade along the center line, we're going to look for significant changes in cross-sectional area. So to do this, first of all, let's toggle off our tin solid to make it a little bit easier to see through our data. And to help with this, let's add on our raster image. Now one thing about raster images is that they're opaque, so we'd like to send this into the background. So once again, we're going to our View button, down to Models, Models to Back, and we're going to send those rasters into the background. Now it makes it a little bit easier to see exactly where our river runs here, and you'll also notice that there's a bit of a road along here as well. So if we take a look at adding on our raster, we can see that this location I've chosen for this source string is probably not very good at all. We should definitely having a source string that's following the top of the road, which is going to overtop before it continues on down the creek. Later we'll look at editing this source string. You'll notice these are the ones that we drew earlier. The ones that we particularly have to take a look at is where the river stops narrowing here and then expands out into a quite wider section as we go through here. Now if you want to investigate these changes of cross section, let's go back and do a window, tile horizontal, and instead of doing a profile with a left mouse click, we're going to do a right mouse click and select perpendicular to a center line. Now let's go about 30 meters either side of a center line, and now we have to pick the string that we'd like to go perpendicular to, which of course is going to be the center line of our river. So now what happens is if we come down below on our section view and add on our tin, Survey and Buildings, as we move along the center line, we can see what the cross section is. Now that high part that you see that's on the left hand side is actually our right bank. We're looking in the direction of that string. So right now we're looking in the upstream direction. Now it's hard to tell in plan exactly where this is taken. So in order to see that section location, we can come up and add on what's called our construction model. This is where 12D creates a temporary string to show us where we're taking these sections. The other thing that's difficult in the section view is to recognize the scale of the drawing. To do this, we'd come back down and we'd toggle on our grid. Now the default grid is 100 by 100, and we could probably use a little bit more resolution in the vertical. Once again, back to the View button, down to our settings, And we're going to change the settings for our grid. So our Y setting, we'll bring that down to 1 meter, and we'll make our X, which of course is the distance along there, the chainage, 10 meters. Now, so that the full lines don't clutter up our screen, I'm going to change that so that there are crosses instead. Now, if we leave this grid as being green, it's going to conflict with the color of our string. So I'm also going to change the color of our grid to an orange color, select Set, and then Finish. So now, as we're moving along the center of our river, we can get an idea of the depth and the scale as we're moving along. Alright, now that we've seen a way that we can inquire, let's take a look at actually creating these strings. So hit Escape, and we can come down here, finish this off. Now, if you're ever wondering if there's any current CAD options active, if they are, they will be listed in the bottom left-hand corner next to the output window. So before I started drawing, it's a good idea sometimes to check to see if there's anything in there, and that's what you'd hit the Escape, is to clear out those message areas. Now you'll notice that there's been some screen damage up here, so we'll come up and do a redraw. And as I was doing that, and also you can tell from the contours, we go from a very thin river here to a much wider section here. So we're going to look at creating some source strings in that area. Now to create those source strings, I'm going to need more than 2 points. So I'm going to drag this across to my create line string. Now it doesn't matter if you create these from left bank to right or right to left. The other thing I'm going to keep an eye on are my buildings, because I've got the buildings out in this area here, and I definitely want to have a cross section before the buildings, during the buildings, and afterwards. So for starting this section, I'm planning on taking one right near the end here. So I'm going to start up here, up at elevation 165, coming down to the center of my river stream here, bringing that out still perpendicular to flow, and then taking a look here to make sure that I'm going to stay perpendicular to the flow in the entire area. Now my plan was to make sure I didn't include the house in this first one, so I'm bringing this up all the way to my elevation 165. Now the other thing here is I don't want to include this little creek that's coming in from the side. So I might just select just a little bit extra point in there to make sure that when I cut back across, I'm not going to include that. So there it is up to my elevation 165. Escape to stop creating that. Now the next one I'd like to have is one that represents this wider cross section here, but also starts to represent my house. So to do that, once again, I'm going to start at this 165 level, come down at what I feel is perpendicular to the flow, and then come across here and make sure it's going through my house, the building that I have there, and once again coming up to my 165 contour. Now Escape to finish that. Now I'd also want to make sure that I have a cross section that's near the beginning of the house as well. So I'm going to come back and create another one. Now this one's also going to pick up the wider section of the river as well. When you're defining cross sections, there's always the decision of whether or not the cross sections should be correct for the low flow versus the high flow conditions. And you often have to make an engineering judgment to decide just what shape these section strings should have. Of course, in the ultimate condition is that you would have one model for your low flow condition and another model for your high event conditions. So we'll just finish off by creating just one more source string here. We'll do one just at the downstream end of our river. So coming up here, it'll come back across. So I'm going to bring that down, keeping perpendicular to the flow. And I do want to represent the end of the building here. So up to my 165. And then of course we would want another one indicating where there's no more building at all. And we want to mark the end of the wider section of our river. So I'm going to come back up here to my 165. Bring this across perpendicular to my direction of flow. And once again, that compromise between the flow direction that you expect in the high flows compared to the low flow conditions. Now, we will create a couple more section strings, to mark the buildings that we have in the upstream here, and to mark any other changes in cross-sectional area. And then we'll take a look at the right bank string that we have not created yet. The procedure we're about to show you, where we use a synchronized plan and section view, could have been used for our center line and our left bank, but we're going to use it to demonstrate how to define our right bank string. So we'll go up and we'll do a window, tile horizontal, just so that we can see a section view and a plan view at the same time. Now it doesn't matter which way we draw our river strings, but this one is also our bank string, but it's going to be drawn from the downstream to the upstream direction. So it has to go not into our source string model, but rather into our river strings model. And it does have to have the name right bank. 2 words, all lowercase. Then to create this, we're not going to use a 2-point string, but drag this out to create a line string. Now our first point we're going to start at will most likely be just downstream of this cross section. So I'm going to go profile that section string, and taking a look at it here, first of all, it's going to be in the direction that we drew it. So for this one, we drew it from left to right, and it looks like there's the location of our right bank point. Now we can just go and select that point in the section view, and you'll notice if we come back into plan, it's already anchored our string. The other thing I'm going to note is the elevation of that point. It's about 157.5. Now, the next thing we have to do is define this between this cross section and this cross section. Now, the accuracy is up to you. All 12D is going to do is to measure the distance or the chainage along this line. So for this one, I'm going to more or less just follow along between the contours here. Now, when I'm going to place these, right now I'm going to go and turn off my point in my line snaps. And the reason for this is I'm going to use what's called a quick snap or a fast snap. And you'll notice my F is turned in. This fast pick will allow me to use just my middle mouse button to pick a point very quickly rather than doing the pick and the accept. So for doing freehand drawing, the fast pick button is a great one to use. So now I've followed my creek along and I'm ready to connect to the next one. So while in the process of drawing the line, I'm welcome to come back and hit my profile and go reprofile my next string. And of course I have to have my point and line snaps turned on. I could go back up here and turn my line snap on, or I can just use my F4 shortcut key. Now I've just pressed the F4 and you'll notice that the line snap has turned back on. So I'm going to go profile this string, and now it's this one that I have profiled, and where I want to snap is up here on my right bank. And once again, rather than picking the point in plan, I'm going to pick it in the section view, and it becomes anchored in plan. So zooming out a little bit again, my idea here would be to turn off my point and line snap and follow along the river a little bit. Looks like I made a mistake on that one. I'll have to fix that up in a moment. And bring that along here until I'm getting up to my next section. Now my next section's all the way down here, so I might as well go profile that now. Once again, make sure my line snap is on before I do that. And where I'm heading for in defining this one, and you can see that this one's drawn in the opposite direction. So I probably want to mark my bank up closer to this spot in here. Now in order to help you with this, we're going to do a couple extra techniques. First of all, I'm going to pick and accept this line, and you can see that that's come straight across. Now, to do a little bit of point editing, let's first of all demonstrate how we use the insert. So if I come across to our CAD vertex, come across and use our insert point, I can now click on that segment and put another point onto it, following roughly between the contours. So if I was looking at fixing up this line, that's exactly what I do, is I just keep adding on those extra few points. I'll bring that a little bit closer. Now you'll notice that those black lines disappear as soon as I redraw the menu. I'm just going to add one more point into there to help define coming around that corner. Now once again, all I'm trying to do between my cross sections is mark the distance. Now the last thing we want to demonstrate is how to fix up one of these lines, and that is we need to delete that point that we created by mistake. So coming across here and using my vertex delete, I can come up, do a pick and accept on that, and now I see I've gone and fixed up that line. Now, as far as having my left and right bank, my right bank and my center lines crossing, not good practice, but wouldn't affect the calculations at all. But I am more than welcome to once again come back, come to my CAD vertex, select insert, pick that string, and finish it off so that it looks just a little bit better. Now in order to finish these, I'd have to continue with this. In order to continue with the line I've already started, I'd come back to my CAD vertex, drag out to my append point, pick the end of that string, and now I'd be free to go on and finish my right bank all the way to the top of my project.